and justice, and we are gonna change the world. Peace, jobs, and justice, we are gonna change the world. Peace, jobs, and justice, and we are gonna change the world forever better. We're gonna change the world soon and very soon, and we are gonna change the world soon and very soon. We are gonna change the world soon and very soon, and we are gonna change the world forever better. We're gonna change the world forever and better. We're gonna change the world.
We had several people say they had allergy problems. If you need a special accommodation, see Jeannie in the red dress over here. In the tradition of labor troubadours traveling with a guitar, taking popular songs and putting verses to them relevant to the protest, strike, or rally, most of these songs Dorothy would have heard or sung. Jimmy's been at that. Jimmy Kelly has been at that for 30 years. He is the recipient of the Labor Heritage Foundation Joe Hill Award and directs the Labor Studies program at San Jose City College. He belongs to 3 unions, the Postal Union, NALC, as a former letter carrier, the American Federation of Teachers, since he teaches at a college, and the American Federation of Musicians, since he plays for money.
Thank you, Pat. Actually, I play for Spirit, and that my good friend Jack Kenny once said to me, he said, you know, he represented 2 million workers in California. He says, but those are bodies. But without spirit, the body withers. So I hope you'll join me in some spirit tonight. This song is by John Hancock. He was a Southern Tenant Farm Workers Union organizer in the 30s. They had the rope, they had the limb. The only thing they didn't have was him. And he escaped with his life and recorded this song in the Library of Congress in the 1930s. We're gonna roll, gonna roll, gonna roll the union on. We're gonna roll, we're gonna roll, we're gonna roll the union on. And if the boss is in the way, we're gonna roll right over him. We're gonna roll right over him, roll right over him. And if the boss is in the way, we're gonna roll right over him. We're gonna roll the union on. We gonna roll, gonna roll, gonna roll, gonna roll, roll the union on. We gonna roll, gonna roll, we gonna roll, gonna roll, gonna roll the union on. And if the cops are in the way, we're gonna roll right over them. We're gonna roll right over them, roll right over them. And if the cops are in the way, we're gonna roll right over them. We're gonna roll the union on. We gonna roll, we gonna roll, we gonna roll, roll the union on. We gonna roll, we gonna roll, we gonna roll the union on. And if the judge is in the way, we're gonna roll right over him. We're gonna roll right over him. We're gonna roll right over him. If the judge is in the way, we're gonna roll right over him. We're gonna roll the union on. We gonna roll, gonna roll, gonna roll, gonna roll, roll the union on. We gonna roll, we're gonna roll, we're gonna roll the union on. John Hancock, farm worker organizer in the 1930s. That song's been sung all around the world. I got to meet him when I was in Washington, D.C., and he inspired me to do some of this music you're going to hear tonight. Another song from the 1930s. You know, Dorothy Day was active in the union movement and supported the union movement into her very ending days. And this is a song from the 1930s, too, saying, "Which Side Are You On?" by Florence Reese. She was a coal miner's wife, and she wrote this song during a strike in Harlan County. Which side are you on? 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 Come all of you good workers, good news to you I'll tell. Of how the good old Union had come in here to dwell. Which side are you on? 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 My mother was a worker, and I'm a worker too. And we'll stick with the Union till every battle's through. Which side are you on? 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 Don't scab for the bosses. Don't listen to their lies. Us working folks haven't got a chance unless we organize. Tell me, which side are you on? 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 All workers, can you stand it? Tell me how you can. Will you be a lousy scab or take the Union stand? Which side are you on? 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 That's Florence Reese. Which side are you on? Next song is a song about a union organizer named Joe Hill. This song was sung by, actually in 1906 in the San Francisco earthquake. Dorothy Day was in San Francisco, and so was Joe Hill. Joe Hill was an organizer. He went to Utah, and he was executed. I know Dorothy Day took a strong position against capital punishment. This song was written by Earl Robinson in the 1920s. It was sung by Paul Robeson. It was sung by, in Woodstock, I think it was sung by Joan Baez. And it was also sung by Bruce Springsteen. And I think I'll do it a cappella. I dreamed I saw Joe Hill last night, alive as you and me. Says I, but Joe, you're 110 years dead. I never died, said he. I never died, said he. In Salt Lake, Joe, I said to him, standing by my bed, they framed you on a murder charge, says Joe, but I ain't dead. Says Joe, but I ain't dead. The copper bosses shot you, Joe. They killed you, Joe, says I. Takes more than guns to kill a man. Says Joe, I didn't die. Says Joe, I didn't die. And standing there as big as life and smiling with his eyes, Joe said what they could never kill, went on to organize, went on to organize. From San Diego up to Maine, in every mine and mill, when workers stand up for their rights, that's where you'll find Joe Hill. That's where you'll find Joe Hill. I dreamed I saw Joe Hill last night, alive as you and me. Says I, but Joe, you're 110 years dead this November 19th. I never died, said he. I never died, said he. Joe Hill. Well, here's a song written by Woody Guthrie. And called Deportee, the plane wreck at Los Gatos. When they were deporting these workers, these migrant workers, their plane crashed near Fresno. And they're buried in a common grave in Fresno. Nobody knew their names. Woody Guthrie read about it in the New York Times, and he wrote this songs dedicated to the migrants who lost their lives. Well, a year or so ago, they found the names of all the workers who were buried in this common grave, and they had a rededication at the cemetery in Fresno. It's called Deportees. Kind of has a ring to it today. Well, the crops are all in and the peaches are rotting. Oranges are piled in their creosote tongue. They're flying them back to the Mexican border. Pay all their money to way back again. Goodbye to my Juan, goodbye to Rosalita. Adios, mis amigos, Jesus y Maria. You won't have a name when you ride the great airplane. All they will call you would be deportees. My father's own father, he waded that river. They took all the money he made in his life. Our brothers and sisters come work in the fruit trees. They rode the trucks till they broke down and died. Goodbye to my Juan, goodbye to Rosalita. Adios, mis amigos, Jesus y Maria. You won't have a name when they ride the big aeroplane. All they would call you would be deportees. Some of us are illegal and some are not wanted. We work contracts out, then we have to move on. 600 miles in that Mexican border. They chase us like outlaws, like rustlers, like thieves. Well, they died in your hills and we died in your deserts, died in your valleys and we died on your plains. We died neath your trees, we died neath your bushes, both sides of the river, we died just the same. Well, the sky plane caught fire over Los Gatos Canyon. A fireball of lightning that shook all our hills. Who are these friends all scattered like dry leaves? Radio says they're just deportees. Well, goodbye to my Juan, goodbye to Rosalita. Adios, mis amigos, Susie Maria. You won't have a name when you ride the big airplane. All they will call you would be deportees. Is this the best way we can grow our big orchards? Is this the best way we can grow our fruit? To fall like dry leaves and rot on my topsoil and be called by no name except deportee. Goodbye to my Juan, goodbye to Rosalita. Adios, mis amigos, Jesus y Maria. You won't have a name when you ride the big airplane. All they will call you would be deportees. Deportees, Woody Guthrie. the tree standing by the water. We shall not be moved. You know, Dorothy Day got arrested many times in the acts of civil disobedience. She stood in picket lines, she stood in civil rights lines, and she stood for others, the hungry and the poor. We're young and old together, we shall not be moved. We're young and old together, we shall not be moved. Just like the tree planted by the water, we shall not be moved. Young and old together, we shall not be moved. We're fighting for our dignity, we shall not be just like the tree standing by the water. We shall not be moved. Well, Dorothy, she also stood up for the children. Well, we're fighting for our children, we shall not be moved. We're fighting for our children, we shall not be moved. It's like the tree standing by the water, we shall not be moved. We want a union contract, we shall not be moved. We want a union contract, we shall not be moved. Just like the tree standing by the water, we shall not be moved. She stood with Cesar Chavez, got arrested with Cesar in California. So we shall not be moved. We shall not be moved. Just like the tree standing by the water, we shall not be moved. That's a traditional song. Well, Dorothy not only stood up for workers, she stood up for civil rights. And this is a song that, yes. Okay.
I'm with you here. First of all, thank you all for showing up. We appreciate it greatly. Thank you all for being part of the St. Paul's family. And then here's a reminder of the Rosary Rally, which is going to be Saturday, October 11th at noon in the park. All right, October 11th, noon in the park. Thank you. Enjoy the entertainment. And we appreciate each and every one of you for being here. Thank you.
All right, thank you. It's a week from Saturday. Thank you, Pat, for inviting me. So, welcome. I hope you like it here. I hope that you are safe and your children without fear. If they come to take you in the middle of the night, we'll be there beside you to stand up for your rights. Welcome, I'd like to be your friend. I hope you're safe and your children again. And they come to tell you what it's wrong and right. We'll be there beside you to stand up for your rights. We'll comfort you, we'll fight for you. You would do for me. And everybody's welcome. We will all be free. Welcome, I say, Well, she was a good union person. She stood up for workers' rights. And here's a song Woody Guthrie wrote about women and their rights. Oh, you... Oh, you can't scare me, I'm sticking with the union. I'm sticking to the union. I'm sticking to the union. Oh, you can't scare me, I'm sticking to the union. I'm singing in the union till the day I die. There once was a union maid who never was afraid of goons and ginks and company think. Deputy sheriffs who made the raid. She went to the union hall when a meeting it was called. And when the company thugs came round, always stood her ground. Oh, you can't scare me, I'm singing with the union. I'm singing with the union. Singing with the union. Oh, you can't scare me, I'm singing with the union. I'm singing with the union till the day I die. Well, this union way was wise to the tricks of the company's spies. She wouldn't be fooled by company's rules. She'd always organize the gals and guys. She'd always get her way. When she struck for higher pay, she'd show her card to the National Guard, and this is what she'd say. Oh, you can't scare me, I'm singing to the union. I'm singing with the union. I'm singing with the union. Oh, you can't scare me, I'm singing with the union. I'm singing with the union till the day I die. Well, you women who want to be free, take a little tip from me. Break out of that mold that we've been told. You've got a fighting history, the fight for women's rights. Workers must unite. You gotta remove those bones like Mother Jones to the front of every fight. Oh, you can't scare me, I'm singing with the union. I'm singing with the union. I'm singing with the union. Oh, you can't scare me, I'm singing with the union. I'm singing with the union till the day I die. One more time. Oh, you can't scare me, I'm singing with the union. I'm singing with the union. I'm singing with the union. Oh, you can't scare me, I'm singing with the union. I'm singing with the union till the day I die. She also stood up for civil rights and racial justice. And one of the songs that was popular in the civil rights movement is this little light of mine. We got some, all of us are little lights. If we can only make sure they stay lit. Well, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Yeah, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. I say this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Well, we've got the light of justice. We're gonna let it shine, yeah. We got the light of justice. We're gonna let it shine. We've got the light of justice. We're gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Said we got the light of freedom. We gonna let it shine. We got the light of freedom. We're gonna let it shine. We've got the light of freedom. We're gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. We got the light of the union. We're gonna let it shine. Yeah, we've got the light of the union. We're gonna let it shine. We've got the light of the union. We're gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Well, on the job and on the line, we're gonna let it shine. On the job and on the line, we're gonna let it shine. On the job and on the line, we're gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Yeah, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. This little light of mine. This is a song written by my good friend John Fromer called We Need a Union. We need a union to have power. We need a union to survive. We need a union to stand together. We need a union for a better life. Alone you got nothing, you take whatever's coming. But when we unite, we got the strength to fight. We need a union to have power. We need a union to survive. We need a union to stand together. We need a union for a better life. I just want to mention, you need a pension, you reach your maturity, need security, you need a union to have power, need a union to survive, you need a union to stand together, you need a union for a better life. Well, union sisters are here to say we want equal work, they want equal pay. We need a union to have power. We need a union to survive. We need a union to stand together. We need a union for a better life. When the bosses want profit, they'll take it from your pocket. You stretch your money farther, life gets harder. You need a union to have power. You need a union to survive. We need a union to stand together. We need a union for a better life. John Fromer, we need a union. Thank you. Well, maybe it was Cesar Chavez. Maybe it was Dorothy Day. Maybe Dr. King or Gandhi sent you on your way. No matter what you are, it's pretty plain to see. If you've been to jail for justice, you're in good company. Have you been to jail for justice? I want to shake your hand. Sitting in and lying down our ways, take a stand. Have you sung a song for freedom or walked that picket line? Have you been to jail for justice? Then you're a friend of mine. Your law's supposed to serve us, so are the police. When a system fails us, it's time to speak our piece. Takes eternal vigilance, justice to prevail. To get the courage of your convictions, like Dorothy Day, let them haul you off to jail. Have you been to jail for justice? I want to shake your hand. Sitting in and lying down are ways to take a stand. Have you sung a song for freedom or marched that picket line? Have you been to jail for justice? Then you're a friend of mine. Have you been to jail for justice? Want to shake your hand. Sitting in and lying down our ways, take a stand. Have you sung a song for freedom? Want that picket line? Have you been to jail for justice? Have you gone to jail for justice? I think Dorothy Day went to jail for justice about 70 times. Have you been to jail for justice? Then you're a friend of mine. Ann Feeney, been to jail for justice. This one's called Voting Blues by David Winters. I want to vote against racism. I want to vote against rape. Want to vote against people being homeless. Vote against crimes of hate. I want to vote against those big corporations. Want to vote against the fascists and the KKK. I vote when they tell me, yeah. I vote every year. I'm tired of voting for the lesser of two evils. Evil is evil, it's clear. I want to vote against guns and ammo. I want to vote against war like Dorothy did. Want to vote against people being homeless. Vote against people being poor. I want to vote against the nuclear powers. I want to vote against the rich. Keep it more and more and more. I vote when they tell me, yeah. I vote every year. I'm tired of voting for the lesser of the evil, and I want to make it clear. I want to vote for one big union. Yeah, you and I won. I will vote for peace. I will vote for jobs with justice, and I'll vote to make our health care free. I will vote for a woman's right to choose, and I will vote for a teacher's right to strike. I will vote for the right to vote against all the injustice I see. Don't forget to vote. Oh, this is a song written by a Wobbly. The Industrial Workers of the World is a group that Dorothy took part in her early part of life before she joined the church. And this song became the anthem of the American labor movement, written by Ralph Chaplin, 1915, and it's still being sung today. When the union's inspiration through the workers' blood shall run, there can be no power greater anywhere beneath the sun. What force on earth is weaker than the feeble strength of one? For the union makes us strong. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. For the union makes us strong. In our hands is placed a power greater than their hoarded gold, greater than the might of armies, magnified 1,000-fold. We can bring to birth a new world from the ashes of the old, for the union makes us strong. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. For the union makes us strong. Solidaridad para siempre. Solidaridad para siempre. Solidaridad para siempre. Viva nuestra unión. I thought we have in common with a greedy parasite who would lash us into serfdom and would crush us with his might. And we've nothing left to do but to organize and fight, for the union makes us strong. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. For the union makes us strong. Solidaridad para siempre. Solidaridad para siempre. Solidarity forever. For the union makes us strong. Thank you. My name's Jimmy Kelly. Solidarity forever and one day longer.
Thank you, Jimmy. Normally, the thank yous go at the end of a program, and then people are looking for the people, and they've already left, so I thought I would start out early with the thank yous. By the way, on that song, Solidarity Forever, when I was a young union advocate and I was doing background information for reporters at a rally we were having, one of the cameramen, union cameraman from the TV station, came up to me and he says, you know, I'm not going to listen to you unless you know the second verse of Solidarity Forever. At the time, I did not know, but now I can do 5 verses. Additional verses are made up. People make up this stuff to popular tunes to fit the occasion. I wanted to begin by thanking Father Dindo Coaro. Without this program would not have happened, and I abused his staff, and he let me do it. And then Mary Menina was the voice you heard at Mass this evening. And Gabriel Mayo, who you see running all over the place here, is the IT technician. And he has done this many times before. I have never done it, and I'm the kind of person that worries about details, so I drove him crazy. Jean Cosme is the liturgist who put the program together and put the liturgy together this evening, and her husband is the caterer, Fred. And we had a number of nights help with the serving. Dr. Susan Moravik is a pastoral associate, and she helped me get a lot of stuff done with the flyer and working out problems. So thank you, Sue. Selena Villanova is also on the parish staff, and she's the one I dealt with for the parish bulletin and some of the announcements. And Gail Thornton is the secretary, I guess, but she takes care of renting these facilities, and she was very helpful. And then a couple of people from the diocese I want to mention is Abigail Pull. I think she's sitting over there. I guess she doesn't want to stand, but her title used to be, I don't know, they change things every day. Her title used to be Catholic Social Teaching. However, Bishop Dolan does not believe in giving anybody one job. So all these second collections that you get during the course of the year for the Vatican, the USCCB, and the diocese, she's responsible to see that they actually produce some money. And then Brianna Della Valle, who you'll see later on the panel, and I'll say something about her then. She's also from the diocese. And then Debbie DiCarlo is here. She's a former parishioner here. And there's a lot of titles at the diocese. I do not understand any of them because they don't seem to match what people do. But in trying to figure out all that, I came to the conclusion, right or wrong, that she runs the diocese. And we're going to cover some Catholic social teaching, which is the best kept secret of the Catholic Church. That's supposed to be a joke, but I don't think it is. At any rate, I hope I don't get in trouble for helping these people present some Catholic social teaching this evening. And I also have the book back there of the Catholic social doctrine of the Church. And I emphasize dogma. It is not Catholic social teaching somebody dreamed up. It's dogma based on the Gospels. And the Church has declared it dogma. And it is very, very challenging. And Dorothy Day is a good example of trying to live those challenges. Gabe, I might need some help with the video here. We're going to start with an introduction from the Executive Director of the Catholic Labor Network.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Amy Shalide Mayer, and I have the delight of serving as the Interim Executive Director of the Catholic Labor Network. I'm so sorry I'm not able to be there this evening in person, but please know that I am joining from afar in prayer and in spirit. We are so grateful for this event that is being sponsored by the Catholic Labor Network and hosted there at St. Paul's Catholic Church in the Diocese of Phoenix. The Catholic Labor Network is a national network. It's a Catholic nonprofit and private association of the faithful in the United States that unites clergy, religious, laity, and people of goodwill to advance the principles of Catholic social teaching on the dignity of work and the rights of workers through prayer, education, and action. And all of those things are happening this evening: prayer, education, and action. So thank you for living out the mission of the Catholic Labor Network there on the ground. I want to take this opportunity to thank everyone who brought this event into fruition, all of our partners at the parish and diocesan level, to our speaker, to our presiders, to the panelists. Thank you so much for joining in this important work. I have a very special affinity for both Saint Therese of Lisieux and Dorothy Day. I have visited Saint Therese's family, her town, her home. The Catholic Labor Network is a national network. It's a Catholic nonprofit and private association of the faithful in the United States that unites clergy, religious, laity, and people of goodwill to advance the principles of Catholic social teaching on the dignity of work and the rights of workers through prayer, education, and action. And all of those things are happening this evening: prayer, education, and action. So thank you for living out the mission of the Catholic Labor Network there on the ground. I want to take this opportunity to thank everyone who brought this event into fruition, all of our partners at the parish and diocesan level, to our speaker, to our presiders, to the panelists. Thank you so much for joining in this important work. I have a very special affinity for both Saint Therese of Lisieux and Dorothy Day. I have visited Saint Therese's family, her town, her home, her monastery in Lisieux, France, when I lived abroad in France, and she has been a very important intercessor in my life. I also spent 6 years at a Catholic worker community in South Bend, Indiana, the St. Peter Claver Catholic Worker, and Dorothy Day's writings and inspirational teachings really formed me into the person that I am today. I remember her saying, if people are reading The Daily Worker, daily. And they started the newspaper, The Catholic Worker, to bring some of the truths of our beautiful church social doctrine to the wider Catholic community and beyond across the United States and now internationally. And I'm just so grateful for the Catholic Workers' witness, not only to the dignity of work, but to the dignity of the human person. So thank you for this wonderful event. We hope this is just the beginning of your connection to the Catholic Labor Network. You can visit us online at catholiclabor.org to find out more, to discover resources about Catholic social teaching that upholds the dignity of work for all workers of all backgrounds. And you can also reach out to me at any time at amy@catholiclabor.org. Have a wonderful evening.
And now I'd like to introduce Jeffrey Odell Corrigan. He is a Catholic writer and comic creator with over 30 years career in pastoral ministry. He held a number of jobs in that as an educator and trainer in Catholic social teaching and action, community organizer, youth minister, and he led a professional association, diocesan social justice directors. And then he eventually established Corrigan Associates, which is a consulting firm focused on coaching and planning and evaluation. His books include Sodality Will Transform the World, Stories of Hope from the Catholic Relief Services, My Lord and My God, Evangelizing Catholics in Social Ministry, and I think some people at the diocese have read that book. Beyond
is Dorothy Day. Almost exactly 10 years ago, Pope Francis went before our Congress and talked about 4 great Americans: Abraham Lincoln, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Thomas Merton, and Dorothy Day. And over the next half hour, the Wikipedia page of Dorothy Day crashed because so many people were saying, "What? Doris Day? What? Who's he talking about?" And I wanted to start by asking you all, first, have you heard of Dorothy Day? Raise your hand. Okay, so good number, almost the whole group, but not everybody. Who is Dorothy Day to you? Tell me one sentence of why she's important. Raise your hand if you want to just say quickly for one sentence, who is Dorothy Day to you? Why is she important? Yes, ma'am.
She refused to serve food with plastic gloves to her guests.
She refused to sell
Food with gloves to her guests.
Okay, that she didn't wear the gloves. She did not isolate her. The idea of the Catholic worker was to connect with people living in poverty, not shovel something onto their plate and have them move on. Okay, Father, I'm going to come out.
She had a lifelong longing for God and allowed God to work in her life and bring about her conversion, which was absolutely amazing, and a co-founder of the Catholic Worker Movement.
She always had a hunger for God. Even in those commie days, you know, there was a joke. She worked for, anybody remember the 1981 film, won Best Picture, Reds? Okay, a few people remember that. It was the magazine that was published called The Masses. Dorothy Day ended up on the staff. So the editorial cartoonist had a joke about Dorothy Day. He'd say, Dorothy Day would make a terrible communist because she's always cornering you at a party and wanting to talk about God. Anybody else? Something important that hasn't been said about Dorothy Day? In the back? Why don't you stand up? I know you can project your voice.
Eamon Hansey has a book that he wrote about his impact with Dorothy Day and how he set up this hospitality house to feed the hungry, to feed the poor, to give them shelter, and they did it in a big way and changed his life, and that guy changed my life.
All right, thank you. Now, one thing that hadn't been said earlier is that absolute commitment to nonviolence. Here's somebody that opposed World War II. I mean, that really pushes the limits, right? So tonight, I'm going to share first about Dorothy's life and ministry, and then a little bit about the sainthood cause. This whole Corrigan Associates thing just meant I have a lot of part-time jobs for a while, for about 10 years. One of them was working for Cardinal Dolan on Dorothy Day's canonization. So I did that for 7 years, and we finished by sending 2/3 of a ton of paper evidence to the Holy See. If you want to be a saint, don't be a writer, because it takes a long time. People always say to me, is it because she had an abortion that she's not a saint yet? I say, because she wrote a lot down. This fella who just sailed through canonization, the young man who had such an amazing way in which he faced death, he didn't write a lot of books. He didn't write a lot of articles. He wasn't a journalist like Dorothy. So for me, the question had always been, where do you start talking about Dorothy Day's life? And I did a deep dive. The first part of the Sainthood Cause is all about the person's life. So it was a big, deep dive into her life and, reading all her publications and all of this. And about 2 years into it, I went home to my wife. That's my wife, Kathleen, in the back. She's helping me sell books today, but she sells a lot more of her books than my books get sold. So she's really the big, successful writer in the family. But I came home to Kathleen one day and said, Dorothy Day, her life would make an amazing musical. And she said to me, you realize you have no skills in that area, right? And I thought about it, and she's really kept me from doing a lot of stupid things over 30 years of marriage. And so I said, all right, well, what about comics? I've done comics on worker justice issues. I'll do a comic book. I'll work with some of the amazing artists I've met, and we'll do a book-length comic book. And that's what that is, Dorothy Day Radical Devotion. And there's always a question of where do you start the story? And for me, the story of who is Dorothy Day, begins with the great San Francisco earthquake of 1906. It's 5:12 in the morning. In Chinatown, they were the first to realize something big was wrong because the cathedral, which was located in Chinatown, the bells started ringing at 5:12 in the morning. People thought, that is weird. And then all of a sudden the earth opened up. And then, because of our construction back then, everything caught on fire. So the whole city of San Francisco burned down. Meanwhile, back in Oakland, John Day wakes up and says, earthquake. And Grace, his wife, she says, I'll get the baby. And he says, I'll get the boys. And they meet outside and they say, where's Dorothy? Dorothy Day got left behind in the house during the great San Francisco earthquake. And she was really traumatized by that. And I think, is it any coincidence that this person who spent her life caring for the people left behind in our society got left behind during the great San Francisco earthquake? It's a part of her life that doesn't get talked about much. But what does get remembered is not so much the trauma as the assistance that the people of Oakland, where they were living, gave the refugees from San Francisco who came over on boats and so forth to get away from the burning city of San Francisco. So all these folks come in, and unions and churches, not big government, no FEMA, no federal aid at this point, not even the state of California. It was run by the relief was run by local churches and local unions. And Dorothy Day saw that. And for the rest of her life, she talked about not government solutions to poverty, but how unions and churches could respond to poverty. And that's one ways in which she deviates from progressive thought today. I've done presentations with progressives, and oh, Dorothy Day was great. She did this, she did that. And say, she opposed Social Security because she thought unions and churches should be taking care of people in old age. Now, we did this, if you get the book, you can kind of see it. All of the corporal works of mercy are shown here. And Dorothy Day saw all of those done by unions and churches. And she asked her mother, and this is a verified quote, not one of these things someone invented. It is said that Dorothy Day said this, but she says to her mother, observing all this aid, says, "Mother, why can't people treat each other like this all the time?" So you see this other side. There's the trauma that connects her to the left behind, but there's also the inspiration she gets from seeing unions and churches lead the relief efforts. So we do a time jump. That's the prologue. We do a time jump to 1916 New York City. Now, Dorothy grew up in the West Coast and in around Chicago, but she wanted to be a journalist. She needed to go to New York. Now, why did she want to be a journalist? Her father was the most successful sports writer in the most popular sport in the United States in the early 1900s. Anyone have a guess what that was? Haven't heard it yet. Horse racing. Can you believe that? So he's the #1 journalist in that, and his 2 sons, older sons, become journalists too. It's like the family business. Dorothy says, "I want to be a journalist too." He says, "Newspaper room is no place for a girl." And she says, "Well, I'm going to be a journalist." "It's no place for a girl." And she says, "Well, I'm going to go to New York and be a journalist." And, "No place for a girl." So she gets to New York, and she starts doing interviews with all the major papers, and all the editors say the same thing. Newspaper is no place for a girl. To the point that she started to think, Pop is a pretty successful journalist. These editors would take his call. Maybe he called them and told them to tell my crazy daughter a newspaper is no place for a girl. But Pop didn't talk to the editors of the socialist papers. So Dorothy talks her way into a job with the New York Call, which was one of the socialist papers. And something I still don't quite understand is there were a lot of radical movements that criticized capitalism at the time. And so you'd have anarchists who believe in very minimal government on the same staff as communists who believe in government having a hand in everything. So it was kind of strange. You have like all the extremes in one. And she becomes a reporter for The Call. And what she finds is, and she lets her editors know this too, that as a woman, she's able to get into places that male reporters can't get into. And so she does a series on daily life of people living in poverty. Ms. Salvatore here, you say your family eats dog food to get by? And Ms. Salvatore says, and this is a quote in the article, "I used to cook up chicken feet for the dog, but now we have to eat them ourselves. We have 6 children. It's not so bad if you cut the nails off and boil them for a long time." And then that becomes the article on the right-hand side of that the front page spinning articles. Mr. J.G. Rockefeller, 26 Broadway. Here's a family living on dog food. So you see that style, if you remember from history classes, the muckraking journalists, that they're really going for the gut. And that becomes a big part of her style in writing about workers living in poverty. Now, Dorothy is part of this very young staff almost everybody's a young adult except for the editor. And this young reporter who seemed to have some kind of mental illness, Dorothy's best friend said, Lewis is as cuckoo as a boiled owl. And I don't know how to translate some of these expressions from the early 20th century, but it sounded like he was mentally ill. He had a big crush on Dorothy, and he went up to her at a dance and tried to give her a big hug, and she smacked him. And this is before her conversion to nonviolence, of course. But the thing is, her editor calls her in the next day and says, Dorothy, I heard you hit Lewis. And she says, yeah, he's always bugging me for dates. I've told him no 1,000,000 times, and still he keeps persisting. And he says, look, if you don't apologize to Lewis, I'm going to have to fire you. Now, today we call it sexual harassment in the workplace. Back then, it was her fault. So she refuses to do it. And a woman named Mary Heaton Vorse, who was a little bit older writer in those socialist circles, who said, Dorothy, why don't you come work for me at the Masses? And so Dorothy moves over to the magazine that was featured in Reds. And she interviews Trotsky right after the Russian Revolution, and she really is doing what her dream was, writing about people living in poverty, meeting the movers and shakers of radical movements. And one day her editor pulls her in and says, Dorothy, we are about to all get arrested, all the editors and writers, and you're new and you're a woman, so I think you could get the last issue of the paper out. You see, the Masses had taken a position against World War I. And in those days, if you opposed a war the United States was in, you could be sent to prison. You know, there's a lot of talk now and a lot of concerns about things that are happening in our country. Well, just tell you, 100 years ago, you'd go to jail for just saying World War I isn't a good idea. So it happens. All the editors and writers get arrested except for Dorothy. And she puts out the last issue, and there's a poem by Dorothy in it about New York City dock life, and I always wondered, when she was putting out the paper with the printers and everything, did she slip in her own poem at the end, or was that going to be part of the issue? I don't know. But Dorothy puts out that last issue, and she's now unemployed. And a friend of hers says, hey, Dorothy, I'm going down to Washington, D.C. to protest for women's suffrage. You want to come? And she goes. She gets beat up. People will say, oh, Dorothy Day, she worked for women's suffrage. She got invited to a rally and went with a friend and got beat up and put in jail. And she used to say right after that, it's not even my issue. Women will vote for war just as much as men. She never voted in her life. Interesting. She fell into a real literary crew in New York. That's Eugene O'Neill. He was known for, these folks used to just entertain each other in the bars, you know, no flat screen TV, you know. So, hey, he is a pretty famous playwright. He's going to recite a poem called The Hound of Heaven, which is about somebody being pursued by God. Eugene O'Neill was an atheist who believed that he was being pursued by God. You figure that one out. I keep meeting these atheists who feel pursued by God in this story of Dorothy Day. We keep finding people like that. And Dorothy felt pursued by God too. And she ultimately was responsive. Another trauma that happens during this time, and this kind of alienates her from the literary types and the radical movements, is one of the young men in these movements who's hanging out there, his sister owns the bar. He gets dumped by his girlfriend and drinks heroin at the bar and dies in Dorothy's arms. And everybody except the guy's sister runs away. And she thinks, all these people, we got together and we'd stay up late at night talking about building a better world, and one of their own dies and they all run? So she got really disillusioned with that crowd. And she said, you know what? I'm going to stop all this literary stuff, and I'm going to do something that's going to help people. And if you remember, this is about the time of that other pandemic, the so-called Spanish flu, which was called that, although the reason it was seen in Spain first was because Spain was neutral in World War I, and they didn't censor the newspapers. So actually it was everywhere. You know, it was like COVID. It was just everywhere. And Dorothy became a nurse and was doing direct service to the people who had the Spanish flu. She didn't get it herself. And she ended up meeting this charismatic journalist named Lionel Moyse. And this is like Dorothy's fatal attraction. It was not a good relationship for her. She became pregnant, and Lionel said, you have to choose. It's either me or the baby. He's not the first guy or the last guy to say that. And so she has the abortion, and he doesn't even show up to be with her afterwards. And ultimately they break up when he holds a gun to her head saying, I can't be held down by one woman. So this is really a bad relationship. But I always tell, you know, when I do this presentation at colleges, I always tell college students, you know, in love, just make sure you don't do a writer wrong, because they will write a revenge novel. And Dorothy writes a novel called The 11th Virgin. And this is just one couple of sentences from it. It's physically impossible for a woman to take a man. She always gives herself up. And now I hate you. I don't want you because I feel everything going out of me to you. The thought of you eats into me continually. So imagine reading that, and it's about you, you know. The New York Times reviews this book, The 11th Virgin, and calls it an adolescent novel. They weren't too impressed. But the fact that the Times reviewed it meant that people heard about it. And Hollywood offers her a contract to make a silent movie out of this. It is lost to the dustbin of history to us. But people who had seen it said that it was terrible and nothing like the book, which, I don't know, we see movies like that today, right? So Dorothy gets $2,500 out of this contract, and she buys a house on Staten Island in New York, back when Staten Island looked like Cape Cod or Delaware Beach or anything like that. And she meets a man named Foster Batterham, and they fall in love, and he's so different from Lionel. He's very quiet. He's really into nature, and Dorothy always lived in cities, and he introduces her to nature, and they fall in love, and she becomes pregnant again. And this time she keeps the baby, Tamar, and she's so grateful to God because she had some complications from the abortion, and she was sure she'd never be able to have kids again. So she says, you know what, I'm going to have Tamar baptized, and I'm going to prepare for baptism myself. Now, Foster, he's not a believer. He's another atheist in her life. And he says, no, I don't want any part of this. And so they're both very stubborn, so it actually breaks up their relationship. They get back together, they break up, they get back together, they break up. 1927, she becomes Catholic herself. And part of the canonization process is I had to go and get her baptism records from the parish in Staten Island. And I found that they're very proud that they were the parish that she joined. So time jump, we go to 1932, and Dorothy is she's found this interesting place for herself of being a journalist who covers radical movements for the Catholic press. At this point, she's been a Catholic for 5 years, and she says, I don't have any Catholic friends. Everyone just comes to Mass and goes home. She says, my pastor never talks about social justice. You know, all this starts sounding familiar after a while. And so Dorothy covers for America Magazine and for Commonweal, and you can read the articles online. They're very proud of them and keep them in their archives. She covers the Hunger March of 1932, which was a communist-led march, and she kept saying, "Where are the Catholics? Where are the Catholics?" And she's feeling this conflict with herself of, like, you know, the stuff that her faith draws her to be so passionate about. The best work is being done by communists. But she says, I'm not in that world anymore. I'm doing something new with my life. So she goes to pray at the Shrine of the Immaculate Conception, and she has almost a vocational prayer. She asks God, and by the way, the scaffolding is there because they're building it, but the crypt church was open at that time. And she says, you know, here I am, Lord. Help me to use the gifts that you gave me to help my fellow workers and the poor. So she gets on a bus. She writes one last breakup letter to Foster, and she comes home, and her sister-in-law says, oh, you've got to see Tamar. She has the measles. And there's this odd Frenchman who wants to talk to you. And people who know the Dorothy Day story, this is Peter Morin. You know, enter Peter Morin. He is a former Christian brother who feels like God has called him to share his vision of a better society with everyone that's very much rooted in Benedictine ideals. And he's had two people. He said the editor of Commonweal and a red-headed Irish communist in Union Square both said, you got to meet Dorothy Day. So he shows up at her apartment, waits for her to come home, and her daughter is sick, and you see him there. He's always talking about his ideas for building a better world. And so he's saying, that is why we must fire the bosses. And, you know, he had a very strange way of indoctrinating people. He would just talk to you so long that eventually you would give up and say he's right. I don't know if it would work well for me. So he shows up and says, you know, Dorothy, you know a lot about Scripture, but you know nothing about the saints and Catholic teaching on these issues. I will be your teacher. And she says, I've had a long bus ride. I just want to go to sleep. You know, can we do this another time? He says, great, I'll be back at 8 o'clock tomorrow. And so he comes back. And the funny thing about all this, it wouldn't work with me, I don't think. But Dorothy realizes what he's saying makes a lot of sense to her. And he outlines a movement that they're going to start together of, it's going to have people, he's going to sponsor roundtable discussions where people will engage the issues of the day. Workers will be scholars and scholars will be workers. They'll open up hospitality houses, like in the Middle Ages, of welcoming the stranger in for travelers and people who are homeless. And third, they're going to have farming communes where they'll farm by day and read poetry to each other at night. Very idealized vision of all of this, but it makes a lot of sense to Dorothy. And so she's like, let's do it. And one of the things Peter says to her is an essential part of this will be having a newspaper. And that really gets her. Because, you know, you think about it, on the one hand, you know, it's this great idea. She can combine church and all that. But she's going from being a reporter to being a publisher and an editor. So it's also a promotion in that sense. So the movement gets started. And in 1933, they're distributing 20,000 copies of each issue. By 1938, that's almost tenfold, because this is hitting a nerve. It's the Depression. Catholics are being approached by communists saying, we care about you, we can help you build a better life. And there isn't a strong Catholic alternative. And this is the Catholic alternative. To say, we care about workers, and we're going to build a better society. And this is a newspaper called The Catholic Worker that is a much better alternative to the Daily Worker, which is the communist newspaper. And of course, she had kind of had falling out with some friends who wrote for the Daily Worker. You know, her best friend was a columnist for the Daily Worker, and she ended up reconciling with all them, but they were pretty alarmed at first. Also, she connected early on, one of the early funders of the Catholic Worker were the Sisters of Bethany. Anyone ever heard of them? They were New York-based, and at the time, they were called Reformed prostitutes. Today, we would call them human trafficking survivors. And they were women who had been in prostitution who became sisters and then worked to free women from prostitution. And they had a deal with Dorothy was they would hide women at the Catholic Worker because it wasn't known, to get them away from their pimps. So they were very strong supporters. They did a lot of articles about strikes. This is a famous strike in Chicago where a steel company, it was called Republic Steel, they sent the Chicago police to beat up and kill striking workers. In the coming years, she did a lot of travel. She went to Koinonia Farm, a interracial community in Americus, Georgia, and became involved in the civil rights movement through that, did a lot of articles about it. She was almost killed by someone who was, there were a lot of people in Georgia who were trying to break up Koinonia Farm, trying to make their crops all be boycotted by people. And here, a local resident shot up the station wagon she was in. Dorothy insisted that she do the night watch, and this Baptist woman, you may notice the accordion in the station wagon. This Baptist woman said, okay, we got to stay up all night. I'll teach you some Baptist hymns. And Dorothy said, great, I'll teach you Liturgy of the Hours too. So they did Liturgy of the Hours together and sang Baptist hymns all night until they got shot at. Traveled all over the country, both covering civil rights, but also covering worker-owned businesses, covering the plight of sharecroppers at the time, and helping young people start their own Catholic worker houses. There was no central office. If you felt God was calling you to open a house of hospitality, you just did it and try to stay in touch with the other ones. But it wasn't like it was run by Dorothy Day. She got in a big fight with Cardinal Spellman. Mostly she got along with the Cardinal Archbishops of New York until Cardinal Spellman. They had a big fight when Cardinal Spellman, he had a labor situation. The cemetery workers were demanding a 5-day work week instead of a 6-day work week for the same amount of pay. Can you imagine that? And he said no, fired them all, called them all communists, and Dorothy wrote that this was wrong, that he should work something out with them, and that the demands weren't so great. But they got in a big fight, and J. Edgar Hoover had always been interested in Dorothy. There's a document we sent to, we sent her whole FBI file to the Vatican, and there's a document there from J. Edgar Hoover writing President Roosevelt saying, when you're ready for phase 2 of the internment camps, this is someone I would like rounded up. He didn't use the word rounded up, but this is someone who should be arrested. So Hoover had this whole vision of like, first we round up the Japanese, next we round up the usual suspects, dissidents. Will we have that here? I don't know. She was a big fan of St. Therese, probably Father said it better than any way I could, but she really, as she grew, you know, from the 30s to the 50s, she gradually realized how foolish she was calling it Pius Pap, and she wrote that biography of Therese, which is actually more successful now than it was when it was published, probably because of the authority Dorothy has and the fact that her biography is different than anybody else's. It didn't sell so well. She said, you know, my editors are not encouraging. They find it dull. Apparently, they believe my writing is only interesting when I write about myself. Because she has like 3 or 4 memoirs. And in the 70s, she used to threaten people in the Catholic Worker and say, someday I'm going to write my real autobiography, after writing like 4 of them. So she mentored a lot of the people involved in Vietnam War protests in the 60s and into the 70s. Martha Hennessy, who's Dorothy Day's granddaughter, who's kind of carrying the torch into the future, we have an ongoing conversation. She says Dorothy loved the hippies, but I read Dorothy's diary, and she complained a lot about the hippies because they'd come to the Catholic Worker and not do any work. And we have Stanley, who's like the clown prince of the Catholic Worker. He's saying, now, we've always had freeloaders at the Catholic Shirker. And Dorothy says, but Stanley, they didn't use drugs and get the girls pregnant. They're as bad as those beats in the 50s. So that's what Dorothy wrote in her diary about hippies. Her last act was actually out west in California, protesting with Cesar Chavez for the United Farm Workers in 1973. Just one last thing about her life. Meeting people who knew her was the big treat of the 7 years, collecting evidence about Dorothy Day. And this is a true story. Daniel Mock told me about, he mentioned to Dorothy one night that The Wizard of Oz was on TV tonight. And, that was back in the day when you had to watch it, if it was on TV. And Dorothy said, oh, there's a movie? I've never seen it. And then they watch it, and, he says, you gotta, and they watch it. And at the end, he says, what'd you think? And she says, I like the book better. And Dan says, there's a book? And I just thought that was so sweet. They ate popcorn and drank sweet vermouth, a future saint. So I'm going to pause there. I have a whole bunch of stuff about the canonization process, but I think I'm about to overstay my welcome. So maybe we'll go to the panel. Phil, you want to help fill people in? But I'll just quickly say, this process, I met probably about 50 people that knew Dorothy Day really well, and it was just incredible. And they were like future saints too. Her mentoring capabilities were just incredible. You have Mike? Okay, go ahead. Oh, I can 10 minutes until the conversation, or we're gonna have 10 minutes of conversation now. Oh, we have 10 more minutes. Okay. All right. Well, we'll have time for Q&A, but I want to just give you a sense of the canonization process because it's complicated and it's weird. And it is something, I think, what's that quote? Democracy is a terrible system until you look at all the alternatives. It's a bit like that. It's human. It's human, so it's fallible. A lot of people, talk about the corruption and the sainthood process and everything. And I'll show you some examples of what I thought there were. But the whole thing of I send a bag of money to the Vatican and they make my mom a saint, that kind of stuff just isn't happening at all. It is a legal process. It is a canon law of the church process. So it's governed by the Chief Justice of the Archdiocese of New York. Sainthood causes happen in the diocese where the person died. So it doesn't matter where you were born. It's about where you were when you died. So in the beginning, you're servant of God. Then if it's determined that you lived a life of heroic virtue, you get the title venerable. I used to think that meant old, but it means worthy of being venerated. So they have to show that the person lived a life of heroic virtue. Then that's when the miracles come in, or martyrdom comes in. If you're a martyr, you go right to blessed. You are beatified. If you're not a martyr, the first miracle has to be found. And then a second miracle makes you a saint or canonized. Or if, say, like Oscar Romero, he was a martyr, so he just needed one miracle before he became a saint. Now, what does a life of heroic virtue mean? Well, let's go back to the cardinal virtues: prudence, temperance, fortitude, justice. Did Dorothy Day live prudence heroically? Did she live temperance heroically, and so forth? And the theological virtues, faith, hope, and love. Did Dorothy Day live hope heroically, and so forth? So all of the stuff that we sent was evidence that the Holy See weighs the dicastery for the causes of saints, makes a recommendation to the Pope, and then the Pope makes a decision. So right now, they're sifting through the 2/3 of a ton of paper trying to figure out, did Dorothy Day live a life of heroic virtue? So the process includes testimonies of those who knew her. So we had 35 people who knew her very well answer questions about all this heroic virtue stuff. Now, a lot of them died since then. So it's just amazing that we were able to get these testimonies in. 2 theologians review all of her published writings. Now, the asterisk on this is that it doesn't have to be the same 2. It's just like The Long Loneliness, her famous memoir. 2 theologians had to read that with a view toward Catholic doctrine and morals. And then they write up a little report about it. Everything she wrote. I mean, she had, there was a romance novel that was serialized in a newspaper in 1918 or 19, Those kinds of things all have to get looked at. Her diaries and letters of import have to be transcribed and submitted. Now, if you've ever heard that, like in the olden days, everybody had great handwriting, it's not true with Dorothy. She had terrible handwriting. We had to get 125 volunteers to transcribe her diary. In her diary, it's not like this big book that says diary on it. I mean, some of them are like shoe boxes full of paper, and some of them are books that say diary on them. There was 10,000 pages in total. So imagine that. That's why this is taking so long. Testimonies of bishops, current bishops asked, what would it mean for the church if this person were canonized? Tell us a little bit about that. So we had testimonies of many bishops and additional supportive material. And I'll show you just a couple of the unique things that we used. Does anyone recognize this fellow? Well, there's many schools of thought on that. I think Dorothy's the greatest superhero. Okay, it's Batman. There's a character in Batman based on her, based on Dorothy Day. This guy, Denny O'Neil, he's 25 years old. He gets asked to make Batman dark again because that show, people, no, Batman. Folks familiar with that show? It turned Batman into a national joke. And DC Comics are like, okay, we made a lot of that money off of that, but we got to get Batman back to his dark roots. This is a guy who saw his parents murdered in front of him. He's not like happy, holy Batman, or whatever. He's a very dark character. And so Denny O'Neil started writing it. He's got his dream job. 26 years old, he's writing Batman. And he starts hanging out at the Catholic Worker and listening to Dorothy. And he begins to have a little bit of a conflict. I am writing one of the most violent comic books out there, and I think I'm a pacifist now. What am I going to do? And he could quit his job and say, oh, this is awful, and protest Batman and all that. Or what he did was he created a character who would be the conscience of Batman and modeled her after Dorothy Day. And you see Batman saying, you and those like you, you're the hope of Crime Alley. Maybe the only hope our tormented civilization has left. And I really think that's Denny O'Neil talking to Dorothy Day, the effect that she had on him. And that character has endured. I heard Denny O'Neil, I did an interview with him about all of this, and he ended up dying like the next year, so I was really glad I did that. But in the 1990s, one of the different writers had her chew him out for putting Robin in such dangerous situations. and she threatened to report him to Child Protective Services. Which, you know, I remember as an 8-year-old reading Batman and seeing Robin there, like, what is he doing? And the other thing is, and this is less well known, there's a character in Star Trek based on her, classic Star Trek, not on those spin-offs. And this is the episode, if you're a classic Star Trek buff, where the Enterprise goes through some kind of space-time anomaly and ends up circling a planet a lot like Earth, and they beam down, and there's Nazis everywhere. And this is like a time warp kind of thing where they went into another alternative reality. And in this reality, the lovely Joan Collins character, who runs a soup kitchen and espouses absolute nonviolence, and the lettering on her window for the soup kitchen is identical to the lettering on the Catholic Worker. It says something different, but it's the same font and everything. So this is Dorothy Day. She starts a movement, a peace movement that prevents the U.S. entry into World War II. And as a result, Germany wins World War II and controls the world. So it's actually both a tribute to Dorothy Day and a critique of her, and really almost like a rationale for just war doctrine over pacifism. It's all very interesting, and it's a great traumatic episode, but it shows both pro and con Dorothy in that show. So I'm going to pause here so Phil can bring us into our next segment. Thank you very much.
I'm going to bring up a couple of people on a panel to have a short discussion, and we'll do some Q&A from the audience. Brianna Della Valle graduated from the University of Arizona in 2023, where she studied philosophy and music. She began working for the Diocese of Phoenix last August, managing the Catholic Campaign for Human Development, the domestic anti-poverty program of the USCCB. She now works as a grant writer for the diocese. She recently returned to her faith, and last Easter was confirmed, and she picked Dorothy from the inspiration of Dorothy Day as her confirmation name. You want to come up here, Brianna? And then Father John, will you come up here? And I'll ask Father John if you would begin the discussion by telling us a little bit about yourself and the inspiration Dorothy Day has had on you.
I'm just thrilled tonight that we have Batman and James Tiberius Kirk, both heroes of mine. I'll recommend definitely get that issue and definitely watch that episode of Star Trek if you want to get a different view of Dorothy Day. There's also an episode of Justice League called Epilogue, which tells the story of an aged Batman. And the woman says, she says, "For all that fierce exterior, I've never known anyone who cared more about his fellow man than Bruce Wayne." I'm from Lockport, New York, 20 miles north of Buffalo. Went to Notre Dame for law school, went back for seminary after my time as a judge advocate in the Army. I'm now a auxiliary priest, that means semi-retired, at the Casa Santa Cruz here in Phoenix, so I help out at St. Paul's. I'm the school chaplain, have Mass at St. Louis the King. I'm the faithful friar for the 4th degree Knights of Columbus. I have the regular Mass and ministry at Community of the Beatitudes, and I pinch hit at Andre House when they need a priest. So I'm delighted to be here. Dorothy Day is a heroine of mine. I'm not exactly a pacifist, but I'm a non-interventionist and non-imperialist, so I think we probably would get along.
And Father John is the running priest.
Jogging now. I used to run until I tore my left knee up. Now I jog, but I still move. Yeah.
Brianna, would you tell us a little bit about your inspiration on Dorothy Day?
Sure. So after graduating college, I kind of found myself not knowing what to do next. And I kind of discovered Dorothy Day during that kind of liminal time. And it was really pivotal for me. So I was going back to church, and I found out about this internship at the diocese, and it was to be an intern working on the Catholic Campaign for Human Development. I interviewed for it, I was like, okay, maybe that went well. I didn't think much of it. I let it go past me. And then I started reading her autobiography, The Long Loneliness. I came to find out that I got the internship, and the orientation was in Washington, D.C., and we were staying at the Catholic University of America's campus, and so I went to Mass in the crypt of the Shrine of the Immaculate Conception, and I'm now realizing that that was a really significant moment for Dorothy Day after your presentation, so that was a bit fortuitous. And I remember going to Mass there and not really knowing what the next few months were going to be like, so I prayed there, attended Mass, had a beautiful time at the orientation with other young adults who really cared about justice work and moving the church forward by serving the poor. And so I kept reading her work, and I came across this line that has always stuck with me, which is, the church often fails to set its face against a social order that makes so much charity necessary. And I read that, and I was like, oh, that's how I feel. It was hard for me to return to the church because I felt like institutionally, in my experience, kind of leaving the Catholic Church and then growing up in the evangelical Protestant world, that it did just that it didn't move justice forward and kind of put a Band-Aid on the social ills of society. And so I think she really re-galvanized my passion for my faith. And so this past Easter, I got confirmed and took her as kind of my saint name. She's a saint in my book, and so I hope she gets canonized one day. But I've just met so many people and served in many capacities, like the Andre House, just with great folks who care so much about justice and faith in action. So she's a great inspiration to me.
So, Jeff, could you tell us a little bit about Peter Morin? It seems to me that he was the idea man, but he needed Dorothy to pull it off.
Yeah, there's a lot of guys who say, I'm an idea man, and they never get anything done, and he found the right person, the right partner.
And she did too with him.
Yeah. There's people that want him canonized too, and one of the Catholic workers in New York told me that he went up to Cardinal Dolan and said, you really should have them canonized together. And Cardinal Dolan said, how about we just get Dorothy first, and then we'll look at Peter.
And Father John, I think you had some story about Peter Morin, about his shoes.
Oh, yeah. I mean, she talked about, he took poverty seriously. He would go out for a walk, and he'd be wearing shoes that were given to him from the Catholic worker and coat, and he'd come back without the coat or the shoes on a regular basis. You did it again, Peter? Well, he needed them more than I did. And so they'd give him a new coat, and they'd give him new shoes, and he'd do the same thing over and over again. He slept very simply. He lived very simply. He's a man of great ideas. I like to think that it was God's inspiration that brought the two of them together. She was the practical one who could do the newspaper and the work, and he was a huge inspiration to her. If she were sitting here, I don't think I'd be going too far to say, oh, Peter should be canonized. And she once said, do you want to be canonized? She says, oh, don't talk about me being a saint. I don't want to be that easily dismissed.
I think Peter Morin was an acquired taste, and it took Dorothy a while to get acquired to him, but they're a good pair. I'd like, if there's questions from the audience, we can take those questions now. Do we have another?
Hello. Okay. just because you touched on it, right? You guys don't know me, but I'm a Knight of Columbus with Phil, and I had never really heard of this until Phil was like, "Oh, you got to read, you got to check this out." Kind of opened my mind to Dorothy Day, but something that I don't want to come across crass or mean, so I'm hoping somebody can answer it. Did she ever acknowledge the abortion that she had? And then, what was that acknowledgement? What was?
That's a great question. Dorothy's abortion was a great trauma for her and something she felt terrible about and something that she worked out in the sacrament of reconciliation. There's some kind of footnote in her baptism record that we can't figure out. It says like see chancery or something like that. And we can't figure out exactly what that was. Maybe it regarded the abortion, maybe it didn't. Sometimes folks ask, there's like maybe 6 or 7 schools of thought about why she shouldn't be a saint. There's the she was a communist, and there's the she had an abortion. But the thing about sainthood causes is they start when the person becomes Catholic. They don't start when they're born. So this is why you have people like St. Augustine, who fathered a child out of wedlock. There's even a saying, boy, those saints did some holy things, but they sure had a lot of fun before their conversions. And for Dorothy, this isn't a fun thing. It's a very tragic thing, and she didn't like talking about it. We did find one mention of it, but it wasn't public. It was in a letter to a woman who had had an abortion and was seeking advice from Dorothy, and she basically acknowledged, I've been there too. She didn't like to talk publicly about it, and why? Only she knew. It wasn't even known publicly until well after her death. She had told a few Catholic workers and basically told them, when the time comes, you can share this. So eventually they did, but it was much, much later after her death.
Jeffrey, what made you become as interested in this as you are?
Become interested? Oh, her life.
Yes. What brought you into this?
Well, back to that Chesterton. This is somebody who took the gospel seriously. This is somebody who made her whole life revolve around that scripture, I was hungry and you gave me food. I was ill and in prison and you visited me. She tried to live. It's funny, in graduate school, they taught us that you call these the hard sayings of Jesus. And I thought they'd come up with something more elegant than that, but they call them the hard sayings of Jesus. When he says, like, what you do to the least of these, you do to me. When he says, sell all your possessions and follow me, those kinds of things, they're hard. And Dorothy went right into that hardness and lived it. And she was better for it. And even to the point of very much irritating the church leaders of the time. It was just very irritating to Cardinal Spellman. And the interesting thing about all this is that when J. Edgar Hoover called Cardinal Spellman and says, what is it with this Dorothy Day woman? I've been chasing her all these years. Shouldn't you be disavowing her or something? He said, she's very well-intentioned. Leave her alone. Now, that's Cardinal Spellman, who was kind of almost an enemy. I was talking to a priest who had been around a while, And he said, you know, we were trained in seminary that there are going to be really irritating people who seem obsessed with some aspect of the church. Be careful in dealing with them because they might be saints. And you do not want to go to heaven and answer for that. And it was interesting. One of the documents that we looked at was the California Encyclopedia of Catholicism, which I didn't know that was out there. And there's a section on Cardinal McIntyre, who had been Monsignor McIntyre, the Chancellor of the Archdiocese of New York when Cardinal Spellman was in charge. And it was written in that he actually didn't, Dorothy Day always talked about her friend, Monsignor McIntyre, that he didn't like Dorothy Day, but he was afraid she was a saint. And so he was very careful in dealing with her. Very interesting stuff gets surfaced in all of this. And I just want to take a second to say that I have not talked enough about Christopher Cardinale, the artist. He's amazing. If you get a chance to look at this book, it is really fine art. He would take forever to do these pages. This project took, from the time I told Kathleen I was going to write a musical to the time the book came in the mail, 8 years. And a lot of that was because of Christopher's painstaking art. It's one of these things where you work with somebody who's perfectionist. It drives you crazy sometimes, but there's a part of oneself that says, but it's going to be really good. When we finally finish this, he was afraid he was going to die. He lives in Brooklyn and rides his bike everywhere. He was afraid he was going to get hit by a car. But anyway, I just wanted to share that Christopher's contribution is immeasurable. I wrote the script, and I would say, okay, do this and do that. But his spirit comes through this too.
Slight modification. It is a graphic novel. It is not a comic book. Okay, there's nothing wrong with comic books. I love comic books. I grew up on comic books. It's a graphic biography of Dorothy Day. It's well worth reading. Wonderfully done. There's a number of graphic novels that are well worth reading. Well, they did comic books on John Paul and one on Mother Teresa too, Marvel Comics back in the 80s.
Hi there. So I just have a question. We've heard a lot about Dorothy Day's radical devotion and service to the people of God and to the marginalized, and certainly that's good, true, and beautiful and holy, but I'd like to hear a little bit more about her faith life and her devotion to God and how that has, that attributes to her potential canonization.
Daily Mass, daily liturgy of the hours, daily prayer with her community, daily prayer with her guests. She had a very deep spirituality. She had to learn as a convert, and Peter Morin informed her, you need to know about the Catholic teaching, and you need to know about the saints. And she came to know them very well. Her life was not just, active service, which it certainly was, but it was active service that was fueled and guided by the Holy Spirit because of her personal spirituality, which was very, very Catholic.
I'm still learning about her, and correct me if I'm misremembering from when I read her book, because it was about a year ago, but I remember I think her mom was Episcopalian, and so sometimes she would go to Episcopal church, but I think her next door neighbors were Methodist, and she would go over, and at night she would read the Bible with them, and they kind of impacted her prayer life a lot, and that was something that I found really interesting because it's at the beginning of her life, because it's sort of in chronological order, and just her care for interfaith related things, and how that's become something that I've witnessed across the Catholic worker community as well. So not just God seen through a Catholic lens, but through other Christian communities as well.
Yeah, I think the others covered a lot. There's two things I wanted to bring in that she was especially devoted to St. Joseph the Worker, and they had a statue in the houses that she was a part of, and he was the patron of the Catholic worker. She decided that St. Joseph's the worker would be the patron of the Catholic worker, and so any unpaid bills they would put under the statue and say, "This is your problem," and they would pray, and then they'd let him do it. And if they felt like St. Joseph wasn't paying enough attention to them, they would start these 40 hours devotionals, and she had a nickname for those. She called them picketing St. Joseph. So they were, using labor tactics and all that. So she had this really fun relationship with St. Joseph, and also the notion of the mystical body of Christ, that we are all connected, and it's a fabric, it's a body. She really got excited about that, and you'll see that references in her writing, particularly in the 30s, where she was learning about Catholicism. Certain things would catch her attention, and she'd be very passionate about it.
This is another critique of Dorothy and of Mother Teresa. They say to Mother Teresa, well, you've helped a number of people. You picked up the dying from the streets and everything, but you haven't done anything to change the society. And she said, yes, I have, one person at a time. That was her call. Dorothy's was to do direct service in the Catholic houses of hospitality, but also to try to change the society, which she referred to, the government, the bureaucracy, and even the institutional church to a degree, a filthy, rotten system. She wanted to reform that. She knew she couldn't do it herself. She needed God to do that. But she thought that by providing direct service, by being pacifist, by obeying the church, she was a very faithful Catholic, but by also calling the church to account when they weren't doing what she believed they should be doing, she was faithful to the gospel. There's a criticism of Mother Teresa also, and it was criticism that was given to me when I was pastor of St. Andre Bessette in downtown Portland, Oregon, where we serve the homeless. Maybe 100, 110 a night, more on Christmas. But down here at Andre House, over 600 meals a night. And they'd say, are you changing any of them? Are you getting them off the street? There have been some success stories, but it's a very small number. And they said, well, what can we do? Well, if they're hungry, you feed them. If they need clothing, you give it to them. If they need hydration, which they do here in Phoenix, you give them that. And then you work with other organizations like the Labor Network to try to change the society. But Jesus didn't say, go out and change the society. He said, go out and share the good news and care for the poor because they're me. That's the critique. I had a young lady that volunteered from high school with their class. She said, you do wonderful work here at St. Andre, but it seems like you're trying to keep people dependent. And I looked at her and I said, that's an amazing insight from one visit. I said, would you talk to my staff about this? We can only do what we can do. God has to do the heavy lifting. Dorothy knew that, which is why her prayer life was so important. But we need to change the society, but we need to change it according to the church's understanding of how that's done. Not with violence, not with hatred, not with judgmentalism, but with direct kindness, compassion, mutual forgiveness. Now, she was an extreme pacifist. I'm not there yet. I was in the Army. But I would not have any critique, any criticism of the way Dorothy did it. Her early life, it was messy. Her life after she received the gift of faith and put it into practice, exemplary. Certainly she should be a saint, in my opinion.
Dorothy talks a lot about this in Therese, where there are big problems, and sometimes you get frustrated because you seem insignificant and unsuccessful. And that's one of the reasons she wrote that book, to emphasize that these little ways and little things have huge impacts, and they need to be done, regardless of the frustration. I wonder, Jeffrey, if you can talk a little bit about the impression I have is that when Dorothy would get frustrated and tend to anger, which is easy to do in the kind of work she did, she would meditate and pray, take time for that.
Yeah, she would also respond with sarcastic remarks, and I would love to see her being the patron of sarcastic people, because it was really painful for her, because she would, say something sarcastic and then, have to apologize, and so she's, when you say messy, it's a good word for it, because she's actually human. And I think part of the trouble with hagiography, and we tried not to do hagiography, we tried to tell things the way it is. In fact, the second most common quote in the reviews, there's about 20 reviews in the Catholic press, and they use the phrase warts and all. That's the second most. The first most common thing is, it's actually good, which, it's actually good, the New York Times. Have that on the back of the book. But Dorothy, she really tried to live that little way, and I'm glad you mentioned Mother Teresa. They were actually friends, and Mother Teresa would come to the house whenever she was in New York, and the two of them would get together, and I think they understood the importance of that constant prayer. And I'm not sure, did I answer your question?
Yeah, I think you did.
Okay.
But I do think that's an important thing for people that are in missions and working on different things, the Andre House or St. Vincent de Paul or Knights of Columbus. We are not always successful, and the problem is always bigger than we are. And you can get burned out, you can get angry, and the solution is to do it from a foundation of faith and prayer, and that will help inspire you to keep going, so you don't burn out.
And that's I think what the question we were answering earlier would be the answer to this, that daily mass, prayer without ceasing, and having a little bit of a sense of humor. Like, the sarcasm wasn't helpful. In fact, you may have heard that quote, "Don't call me a saint, I don't want to be dismissed that easily." Folks heard of that before? She said, a journalist, that Time magazine, and we sent this to the Vatican too, Time magazine did a feature on living saints in the 1970s, and Mother Teresa's on the cover, and Dorothy's in with the B-level saints in the interior. But a reporter, she gave a speech, I think it was at Marquette, and a reporter said to her at the end of it, "How does it feel to be a living saint?" And that's when she said, "Don't call me a saint. I don't want to be dismissed that easily." And Robert Ellsberg, the publisher of Orbis Books, who's as much as you can get to a literary executor as you can with Dorothy, he said it's actually become her most famous quote. And I know she meant that when she said it, but all of the things she said in her life, the things people remember most is a sarcastic remark about sainthood.
And the filthy, rotten system. That's my favorite of hers. Trying to think of what you got to remember what Jesus said too. The poor you will have with you always, and you always can do good to them. So this is a work, the Catholic Worker, Andre House, St. Vincent de Paul, the Labor Network, the work of the church. This is a work that all of us in some way need to do for the rest of our lives. And the next generation will have to do it, and the next generation will have to do it. If we think we're going to solve the problem like that, certainly politically, never going to solve it politically. It has to be charity, compassion, direct service to those who are in need, because they will be with us always, and we can always do good to them.
I love her sarcasm. That's one of my favorite aspects of her, and I think this is reminiscent of The Little Way, too. She said, everyone wants a revolution, but no one wants to do the dishes. And I think I just want to put that in my kitchen every time. I'm reluctant to do any house chores, but I just think that's so resonant with, especially with everything happening in the world right now. It's hard. You get disillusioned with systemic inequality, and maybe we feel like our leadership should be doing more to solve these kind of global issues, but we have to remember that we have to do the dishes. We have to find our little way and do what we can as God calls us to.
Phil, I just think this has been wonderful, and I don't want to leave without knowing about you and how you got involved in this.
That's a long story. Goes back about 55 years. So, but I got pulled into the labor movement. I was studying piano and music at the university full time, and I was had a private instructor on the piano full time, and I was working full time, and I couldn't handle it all. But one thing happened at the post office where I was working. They had these overhead conveyor belts that just were old and clangy and whatever, and my ears would be ringing when I left work every night. And I thought I was going to lose my hearing, and that would not be good if you wanted to be a musician. So, especially since I wasn't Beethoven. But that led me to a union meeting, and they pulled me in. And the more I worked with workers and their problems, that became an advocacy for me, a love for me, and I connected it to Catholic social teaching, which is we have a couple minutes left, Jeff, and I was wondering, since you often instructed and talked about Catholic social teaching, how do you see Dorothy's life informing Catholic social teaching?
You know, it's interesting because I heard on a podcast that Dorothy Day came into the Catholic Church because of Catholic social teaching, which is absolutely untrue. She came to the church because after she had an abortion, she was able to have a kid, and she thanked God for that. It was God's grace that brought her in. And I think it was Peter who taught her about the connections, because she wasn't hearing it in the church. You know, she wasn't Catholic in 1925. I mean, in 1927 she was, but she didn't know that much. So part of Peter's great gift was bringing her into that great tradition. And I have to say, I don't know about you, but I'm really excited that our new Pope took his name from Leo the 13th, who is the founder of modern Catholic social teaching. And I would really like to ask you a question. Working with the Catholic Campaign for Human Development, you must see some of the most interesting stuff in the diocese. What is one way that you see Catholic social teaching being implemented that gives you hope?
Oh, that's a great question. I think the fact that, Abigail, Debbie, the people I work with, and most especially Bishop Dolan, recognizing the power of local communities, like how you mentioned how she felt that it wasn't the government's job to solve poverty, it was the local church and the unions. And I think our diocese is moving towards recognizing the significance of that. This past year, we funded 5 local anti-poverty nonprofits, one of which, for example, is a parish, Santa Teresita, in our own community with a primarily Spanish-speaking population. They live in a low-income area, and they're dealing with a lot of issues, especially related to fear surrounding the immigration crisis happening right now. And just the ability to be able to collect the resources from our local community and pour that into a parish that's doing community organizing and justice-focused work to help people to become self-reliant, and they're the closest to the problem, so that idea of subsidiarity and them knowing the solutions, and our bishop and our leadership recognizing that that's the solution, really.
Peter said he wanted to create a society where it would be easier for people to be good. That's the society that we need to create, and we can't expect the government to do that. Got to have government, got to have order and control to some degree, but the problems of our society are going to be solved by we people. And it's not just enough to vote. You got to go there and do some work, and we should depend more on the church. We should depend more on nonprofits. We shouldn't expect the federal government to do everything for us, because basically they don't do it very well.
I have a comment. Earlier, as you were talking, I wondered, what would Dorothy say to us if she were standing here, to us as the body of Christ, that we could do to make a difference in the chaos that we're in currently? And I'm worried about my grandchildren. I'm closer to the end than the beginning. And what do I say to them? How do I encourage younger people to pick up the mantle?
That's a question that always comes up at these events. What would Dorothy say about fill in the blank? And Dorothy has many grandchildren. You know, she had one child, and that child had 8 or 9 children. So Dorothy had those great grandchildren. And 2 of them, you know, one got the writer's gene, and one got the activist gene, I think. Kate Hennessy wrote this great book, The World Will Be Saved by Beauty, which is a biography of both Dorothy and Tamar. So we had to hear a lot of Tamar's story in that, because she wanted her mother to get some attention in all of this. And I remember she gave a presentation in New York, and at the end of it, somebody said, this is at the very beginning of the first Trump administration. Someone said, do you think Dorothy would have been at the Women's March? And Kate thought about it for a minute, and then she said, I don't know about that, but I know she would be at Standing Rock, where the Native American tribes were coming together and protesting that pipeline going through reservation land. And for me, that answered that question for me forever. Where are the people suffering the most? That's where Dorothy would be. I don't think she would be making pronouncements about the president should do this, the president should do that. But I wouldn't be surprised if she was in Palestine right now.
And everything that I've read about her personalism, again, that was a gift from Peter Morin. She looked directly at people. She talked and listened to people. I think she'd probably not spend 6 or 8 hours in front of a screen following a 24-hour news cycle. She would respond to the people that came to her house of hospitality. When she was out on the front lines, you know, doing the protests, she would be with the people and not tap, 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 swish, swish, swish all day long. That might be something you could suggest to the young people. More reading, more prayer, less getting upset about what the popular culture and the media are pumping into us on a daily basis.
I think technology is definitely a problem, but I think we need to move beyond maybe criticizing the overuse of it and look at what really is beneath the overuse of it, which is really just a desire for community. I think we're experiencing a lot of vulnerability amongst our young people and our young adult synod that we're having, and helping with that initiative. A lot of people have just spoken about how there isn't this third space to gather with people beyond work and coming home. And so I think the fact that young people are coming forward and being so open to share that they want to have community is the first step to making it possible. And so that gives me a lot of hope as a young person. And, you know, Dorothy Day said the final word is love. And community is one of the best ways in which we can practically bring about loving each other. So I think just finding more space to listen to each other and dialogue and build community is something that young people want and are open to, and I think that's a big hope that I have.
That's a good place to wrap it up. We're out of time. I just want a couple of advertisements. Jeff's graphic novel is in the back if somebody wants to make a purchase. The Catholic Labor Network has a couple things coming up in October talking about synodality. We are having, at the request of the USCCB, we are doing listening sessions with workers and the laity. We'll have two of them, one October 8th and one October 18th. You can get more information on our website, catholiclabor.org. Those who said, how much does this cost or can we make donations, you can do that on catholiclabor.org. Father, could you give us a benediction?
Good and gracious God, we thank you for this gathering this evening. We ask for the intercession of St. Therese, the little flower, and for the servant of God, Dorothy Day, that we may follow the calling of Christ to care for our brothers and sisters personally, to feed the hungry, to give drink to the thirsty, to give clothing to those who are in need, and to give welcome to all our brothers and sisters. Therese and Dorothy, pray for us.